co-founder. First, let me thank Courtney Nicolato, the head of United Way of Rhode Island, for joining us, talking about her call for $500 million of the $1.1 billion in federal funds to go to affordable housing. Let's go down to the University of Virginia. Jennifer Lawless, she's the chair of the political science department at Jefferson's University. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm happy to join you.
Okay. We have spoken for the better part of 3 years on GoLocal Live. There is no more higher stakes than maybe today for the Democrats and Joe Biden. Walk us through what is at stake literally in the House of Representatives as we speak.
Biden's entire agenda. Basically, this was an arbitrary date that Nancy Pelosi decided in consultation with moderate Republicans in the House to vote on the infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill is not particularly controversial. The overwhelming majority of Democrats support it, moderates and progressives alike. But the progressives are unwilling to support this bill unless they're also given the opportunity to vote on the $3.5 trillion spending bill that would include all of the things that are not straight infrastructure. And there, the Senate's unwilling to move. So these House progressives, encouraged by Senate progressives like Bernie Sanders, have decided that they will vote to sink the infrastructure bill because they want to get both bills through. And as a result, Joe Biden's entire agenda is on the line. And if this infrastructure bill does not pass, it's going to be very, very difficult for the Democrats to not see major upsets in the 2022 elections. Now, my understanding is that ultimately, over the course of the next few days or next week or so, there will be some agreement struck where that infrastructure bill probably will get through. But the fact that all of this dirty laundry has been aired, the fact that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer seem unable, even with Democratic majorities, to push through a popular bill causes a lot of people out there to question whether the Democratic Party has the leadership required to take the country forward.
Okay, just to recap, just to set the stage, the Democrats control the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, correct?
Yeah, I mean, razor thin margins. Kamala Harris is the deciding vote in the Senate. Nancy Pelosi can't lose more than three or four Democrats on any bill. But the reality is the majority of the American people don't understand that, don't know that the Senate is a supermajoritarian institution where you really need 60 votes to get anything done. So the optics are just horrible for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party.
Okay, so, I can't remember which era it was, but if the Democrats screw this up, an infrastructure bill that has widespread support nationally and in Congress, and including with some Republicans, should they be forced by law to rebrand themselves back to one of those names of parties gone by, like the Know Nothing Party? I mean, this is politics 101. You control the votes. Politics is about votes. You win the presidency by a vote, right? You can win it literally by one electoral vote. You can win a seat in Congress by having one more vote than anyone else. The Democrats have the vote. They can't get out of their own way.
It's true. I do think it speaks not only to the Democratic Party's ability or inability to lead, though, but also a lot of this fundamentally comes back to the filibuster and the power of the filibuster. And I would not be surprised if we don't see major action taken with Democrats that might not traditionally have supported abolishing the filibuster, deciding that this is the only way to get things done, and acknowledging that that means that when the Republicans are in power, the Democrats are going to be steamrolled every day of the week. But at least when the Democrats are in power, they might be able to push some legislation through. Now, in this case, that doesn't mean getting Joe Manchin on board. Getting rid of the filibuster doesn't mean all of a sudden that this West Virginia Democrat is going to start voting with Biden and the Democratic Party. But it does mean that the entire calculus of what's feasible changes because you're talking about getting 50 votes instead of 60 votes for a lot of this legislation.
I got to tell you, I'm not buying this one. If you can't get to 50, it doesn't matter if you can't get to 60. I mean,
but compromises can be, the issue is that compromises can be made on other pieces of legislation. So a deal could be made to make Joe Manchin vote with the Democrats on a particular bill because he would be able to get something else that he would want that would never reach 60 votes in the Senate. And so it's a medium-term game, but at least it's a game that the Democrats would have the ability to play. Right now, negotiating with him is basically a non-starter. if we believe the memo that was leaked earlier today, at the end of July, Joe Manchin basically presented a $1.5 trillion spending bill. He cut $2 trillion off of it and said that's what he's willing to go for. And so at this point, we have one Democrat in the Senate who is not only holding everything up, but holding everything up to chop it back by 2/3. And a lot of people would argue, if they understood the rules of Congress, that seems a little bit unfair.
Democrats changed the rules on how a Supreme Court justice got approved in the United States Senate. I can't remember if it was Tom Daschle or Harry Reid. And that didn't work out well for the Democrats. That shifted to a 50-vote majority if the Republicans had the presidency. So you just needed a simple majority. And that's tilted the Supreme Court to, a 2-to-1 margin.
Right. So it didn't work out well for the Democrats, but the Democrats couldn't have forecast who was going to die when. And so, when they change these rules, they're changing them working under the assumption
here's what the Democrats should figure. The Democrats should figure that anything that's left up to chance is not going to break their way. So who dies when has not been in their win column. I think they need to think about whether or not they want to give up the filibuster, especially about 12 months before one or both houses of Congress is probably going to shift to the Republicans. I don't know.
Right. I mean, so that's exactly right. And there are two issues at stake, right? The first is, okay, they somehow managed to get all of the Democrats in the Senate on board to abolish the filibuster. They abolish it, and really all they do is make it easier for the Republicans to send legislation to Joe Biden's desk that he will ultimately veto, right? It's unclear that the Republicans would have even close to veto-proof majorities on anything. So the Democrats would still be able to hold their own for 2 more years in terms of preventing legislation they're opposed to from getting through, but they certainly wouldn't be able to do anything. The question is, what could they do over the course of the next 12 months? And would it be enough to signal to the American people that they should not lose control of both chambers? And maybe that's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in the next 12 months, if they were going to get rid of the filibuster, that was a January agenda item, not 9 months later, where they've missed 9 months of passing legislation. Seems ill-timed, ill-conceived, and a definite opportunity for the Republicans to take further advantage of the Democrats. Let's go to the other 3 big issues that are all pending. They are the spending cap, keeping the government open, the debt ceiling, as well as this $3.5 billion social service spending package. Let's talk about each of these. Are we going to be able to keep the government lights open? On?
This is a bad game of chicken, and frankly, the Republicans are playing more rounds than I would have expected. So at the end of the day, I think it's very, very unlikely that they are going to create a situation where in every single campaign ad, the Democrats can suggest that the Republicans shut down the government amid a global pandemic. But they're going to wait until the clock strikes midnight, I think. They're going to push for everything they possibly can push for. So I'm still optimistic. We don't know exactly when the money runs out. We don't know exactly when the bills have to be paid. It's a matter of days. But certainly this is not the way that you want to govern a country or pay your bills. I do think it'll happen.
Is it good U.S. policy to kite checks? Is that what it's called when you're sending out checks and you don't have the money in the bank? Is this really what we're down to now as a federal government?
I mean, it's terrible because what I think a lot of people don't understand is this is money that's already been spent. And so you've got a lot of Republicans out there saying, well, this $3.5 trillion spending bill is crazy. I'm not going to authorize it. That's why I'm not going to raise the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is to pay the bills. The bill arrived in the mail. They said, you've already spent this money. You now have to write a check and pay for it. And the entire global economy rests on your willingness to do so. This is paying for Trump's tax cuts. This is paying for social spending over the course of the last year, over the last 10 years. And so it's just not true that this is in any way linked to the $3.5 trillion spending that the Republicans currently don't support. Now they're saying, well, it is all linked because if we continue to accrue this kind of debt, we're going to be in a situation where nothing seems like it's too much money, but it's just a false comparison.
Okay, let's go to this $3.5 billion spending package that progressives have been the lead on. It has a majority of Democrat support. It has no Republican support. And at least two major members of the United States Senate, Senator Sinema from Arizona and Joe Manchin from West Virginia, have said, we're not buying into this. We think that this is too much spending all at once. The economy is trying to come back. We have deficit problems. The Democrats, especially the White House and Senate leadership, have attacked Manchin, saying, well, you've never told us what your spending cap is. What's the amount you'd be willing to go along? That wasn't actually true. There was a memo in which he said, hey, my top line's $1.5 trillion. And where are we now? And is this just dead?
I think a $3.5 trillion price tag is dead. I think at the end of the day, if Joe Manchin says he'll support 1.5 trillion, the Democrats would be crazy not to take 1.5 trillion. That said, it's unclear that it's fair. He was not elected president of the United States. He was elected senator from West Virginia, which is 70% Republican. And so, the idea that he has a mandate or the idea that he is the person to carry forward the mantle of the Democratic Party's agenda is frankly just ridiculous. That said, this is the way the votes go, and this is what he wants. $1.5 trillion is still a lot of money, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. But we're beginning to find out from this memo that it's not only that. He also wants the Hyde Amendment included in this bill, which restricts government funding to support a woman's right to choose. So I haven't read all of the details, but it looks like it's not just a reduced price tag. It looks like there are a lot of additional strings attached. Kyrsten Sinema, on the other hand, has been relatively silent about what her demands are, what price tags she's looking for, and she's been meeting with the White House more frequently than Manchin has been. So it's unclear what's going on there, but my bet is that they're going to try to resurrect some kind of spending bill that moves us at least, beyond the $1.5 trillion price tag.
Okay, so let's break this down in a couple ways. First of all, Sinema was over at the White House 3 or 4 times, I think just yesterday alone, including with at least one private meeting with the president. So somebody in the White House must have got some idea of what she wants. I doubt she'd be over so many times if they didn't have any idea. But let's go to this $1.5 trillion spending package that Joe Manchin said I'm willing to go along with despite record deficits, despite the economy trying to. If you said under Obama, forget the Trump years, if you said under Obama, we're going to pass a $1.5 trillion spending bill to change the safety net, to change the infrastructure of how government deals with the most needy, Democrats would be doing backflips. Why is there such a resistance by Bernie Sanders, AOC, and numerous others, they're the highest profile, numerous others, to take a big, huge win and put it in their pocket?
Well, because some of this 1.5 trillion, or most of this 1.5 trillion actually, would not even be enough to cover the kind of spending that has already been taking place that they want to make permanent that we saw during COVID, right? So, for example, cutting African-American poverty in half, cutting child poverty in half. What these progressives want to do is just make that now what we do, right? So maintaining these kinds of cuts and this kind of spending moving forward. And so that already means that a huge chunk of this $3.5 trillion price tag is just to extend spending that has already happened. And so then when we think about going beyond that and providing more of this soft infrastructure, we're not talking about a $3.5 trillion price tag anymore. So that is part of it. Part of it is like, so if we don't pass the 3.5, according to these people, that means we're actually going to be moving backwards on some of the advances that we've made in terms of the social safety net that has been created over the course of the last year.
Now, that social safety net was put in temporarily in response to a global pandemic. Let me also add, we don't have any money, right?
It's okay, we don't pay our bills either. I mean,
right. We don't have any money. I raised the same questions with Republicans who are on GoLocal Live during the discussion on the Trump tax cuts. We don't have any money. Does it just not matter that we don't have any money?
Well, we have some money. And the bill, if you look at the nuances of the bill, should potentially pay for itself, right? So, I mean, there are going to be increases in corporate tax rates. There are going to be increases in the taxes of people who are earning more than $400,000 a year. There are going to be loopholes that are closed. Now, that's not going to cover $3.5 trillion. The Biden administration says that it will. The reality is that the kinds of costs associated with a bill always exceed the amount of revenue that can be generated from it. But, it certainly doesn't have a $3.5 trillion price tag flat out, right? So it's going to pay for a large portion of itself. But the issue is that that's not a very easy argument to make to the American people, and it's not a very easy argument to make to Republicans that want to knock off some vulnerable Democrats.
Okay, and I'll go with the last question. Joe Biden doesn't get this infrastructure bill passed today, the deadline as set forth by Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Is this administration, it'll finish out its 3 years, but is it functionally over?
No, because Nancy Pelosi's deadline was completely arbitrary. It's not linked to anything other than a political move that she was trying to make to generate incentives for people to sign on to the bill. And so as long as the messaging is right about it, now I have no reason to believe that the messaging will be right because everything has been a disaster over the course of the last several weeks. But if the messaging is right, the American people don't care. They're not going to care if the bill passes this week or next week or 2 weeks from now. What they care about is when the new year begins, are there these good paying jobs and is the economic recovery moving at an even faster rate than it is now. And so the Democrats do have quite a bit of wiggle room in terms of the date of the infrastructure bill, but they've got to pass it, in 2021 if they have any hope of holding on to the House in 2022.
When you bring up good paying jobs, I'm at a loss of what a good paying job is. Allie's Donuts is going to have to close part-time because no one will take their $18 an hour donut cutting job in the back end of their donut shop. So I don't know what a good paying job is. $18 an hour, based on the number of hours I work in a week, would be a major, major increase in compensation.
You get both.
You get the last word. What happens today?
Well, the thing that I'm really interested in is Nancy Pelosi's statement that said that getting these bills through will be her final act in Congress. So does that mean that she's going to announce that she's not seeking re-election? Does it mean she's going to announce that she's going to step down as Speaker? Is she going to resign? So I think that there's a lot to be said about what happens with these bills and the amount of success she's able to claim for them, because that will ultimately define her legacy at least as much as being the first and so far only female Speaker of the House.
And then I have to follow up. Who will be the next Speaker of the House when Nancy Pelosi leaves?
I think she's living. I don't know. I mean, the leadership it's unclear. Adam Schiff, Hakeem Jeffries, these are two very high profile members. Jamie Raskin was pretty high profile during the impeachment. We'll see.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawless from the University of Virginia, with her up-to-date insights into what's going on in Washington, D.C. I also want to thank Courtney Nicolato for joining us earlier today, talking about $500 million proposal for affordable housing in Rhode Island. And for everybody who hasn't gotten vaccinated, run, don't walk. Kyrie Irving, a person who believes that the world is flat, is opposed to getting vaccinated. If that's not a reason to get vaccinated, you should get vaccinated because you don't want to be caught in the Kyrie Irving bucket of life. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Look for much more updates today on GoLocal. Thank you.